Welcome to Larking Gowen Insights, accountancy and business advice for all, a series that gives you bite-sized tips and guidance on tax, funding, legislation, reforms and much more. With case studies, business advisory and sector specials and even interviews, our team of experts are committed to helping you navigate the world of accounting and finance with a variety of presenters from across our specialisms. So, let's get on with today's show.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Burwood. I'm a medical partner at Larking Gowen, and today I'm joined by Rob Day from Mills Reeve, and we are going to talk about the NHS 10-year plan and what comes next. This podcast is being split into two. We did a live webinar at our office on the 1st of October 2025, and unfortunately the recording for the first three slides dropped off. So the recording we're going to do now is just covering off those first three slides, and then there'll be a joining up of the recording that was done on the evening of 1st of October. So I hope that makes sense. Rob, may I hand over to you to kick off?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, hi everyone. So it's only a few slides that we need to sort of recover. And what we did during the session and what we'll do in these first few slides is, yes, we're looking forward in relation to the 10-year plan and what we anticipate will materialize in connection with that. But we thought it would be useful to consider that 10-year plan in the context of what trends we've seen, particularly over the last 10 years, seeing that so much has happened in that time frame. So what we started with and what we thought would be useful to do is to consider some of the key headline statistics that have happened over the last 10 years. So reading off that slide there, if we consider from the period from 2015 to 2025, the number of GP practices shrunk within England from 7,623 to 6,119. So we've had a fall of circa 20%. At the same period, we've also seen a fall in GP partners. So we've seen a fall of almost 25% of GP partners there. That's made worse from two other statistics that we have. So the first is in connection with full-time equivalent GP partners, and that's fallen by approximately 25% over that 10-year period. And then if we consider that by reference to the age demographic, and I should say that these statistics are all taken from the BMA. If we consider the age demographic that we have there, what we see in that graph on that slide that we've flashed up is that there is a disproportionately high number of GP partners that fall into the older category there. So we're not necessarily seeing the younger generation of new GP partners and business owners coming through. But if we consider that by reference to some of the increases we've seen, so yes, we've seen a fall in the number of GP practices, but in terms of the number of patients per practice, that's increased by approximately 38%. So what effectively that means, and it's certainly something that we're seeing in connection with the work that we're doing, is yes, we're seeing the number of GP practices reduce, but the size of those practices and the locations from which they operate has increased. So in essence, they're working over multiple sites, are holding multiple contracts, etc. We've also seen quite a significant jump in terms of the number of total registered patients. And we've also seen quite a significant jump in terms of the number of appointments that have been delivered by GPs, contractors over that period. So all quite a telling set of statistics that we've seen over the last 10 years. So moving on, Andrew. So if we then move on, what has that sort of led to? So we've seen quite a number of reports that have been announced and have been released. So one of those reports has been the Darcy report, which was obviously well publicised. And they reference quite bleakly that the state of the NHS, they've referred to it as being in serious trouble. In connection with that report, they made some headline points. None of it new. We all knew this before, but it's still worth recapping. So an observation within the Darcy report that there's still a disproportionately high proportion of funding which is being moved into secondary care. It's not going into primary care. So that's increased from 47% to 58% from 2016 to 2022. There's been a lack of funding to shift care into the community, which we'll come on to as one of the key pillars of what the 10-year plan will look to do. And there's been a significant lack of capital investment in connection with things such as estates or the wider infrastructure needed for the health service to operate. So yes, we've had these reports, we've had these statistics which reflect what's been going on in practice. We've also had the 5-year GP contract. So that was released in 2019. So we saw the emergence of primary care networks in order to create these multidisciplinary teams. The aim being to create a broader workforce to be able to cope with the increase in demands on general practice, but also to deliver a broader range of services given the sort of needs and the emerging needs that we saw within the patient population. We've also seen the new Health and Care Act arise during that 10-year period. So the new Health and Care Act, it did various different things, but one of the most fundamental things it did was it created a statutory footing for the current infrastructure, if you like, when it comes to the integrated care systems that we all now work within. So what that meant is, whereas before integrated care systems didn't have a statutory footing, they suddenly did, and they created integrated care boards and the partnerships that sit below them, and effectively gave integrated care boards the new delegated commissioning authority when it comes to managing and commissioning primary care contracts. So a lot has happened over that 10-year period.
Thank you very much, Rob. We'll now switch over to the recording on the evening. If you do have any questions following the presentation, please do get in touch with either Rob or I. Contact details are at the end of the session. Thanks very much.
There is still this lack of funding shift, despite successive governments saying that they're aiming to address that. There's been a lack of that funding shift into the community, into general practice and at community level. And there's been a worrying lack of capital investment in infrastructure, particularly premises. Within that 10 years, we had the 5-year GP contract with the lightning speed emergence of PCNs. If you can all cast your minds back to 2019, we were told in January that primary care networks would become a thing. And then, April, that we were expected to sign up to that. We probably spent the best part, and I know you probably did, and Andrew would have done the best part of 3 years trying to navigate all the issues that created and all the things which weren't thought through during that process, VAT being one of those. But the idea between PCNs was effectively to start to realise and give a footing to integrated care systems and their new proposed way of working. So Andrew, if you could just switch on to the next slide. So for those that don't know, this should be common knowledge now, and this is from the King's Fund. So with integrated care systems, they were around during the 10 years leading up to the 10-year plan, and even slightly before that. But ultimately, what it aimed to do is deliver care at 3 levels. One is at neighbourhood level, so that's the level of practices, so GP practice work at that level. You then have PCNs, similarly working at that level. You then have the layer above that, so that's place level. So that would be a city-wide level that you would expect to be operating, and then you would have a system-wide level. So in essence, coterminous with what we consider to be integrated care boards geography. That was the aim. We obviously had PCNs, and in the interim period to today's date, we had the new Health and Care Act. Integrated care system was a brainchild. It was going through a process of evolution, and then it was given statutory footing as a result of the Health and Care Act. So what that did is that created integrated care boards as legal entities, and it set the footing upon which we effectively have the sort of commissioner structure we have today. It would be remiss not to talk about the flip side of this. We're obviously looking at this from an NHS perspective, and what we're seeing from an NHS perspective, it's almost a mirror image when we consider it from a private perspective. So if we look at Busson's reported report around private provision when it comes to GP consultation, we're seeing that now 13% are private appointments. That's as opposed to 3% in 2009. So we've seen an obvious increase of 10%. So one of those private providers that solely deals with private work, the Spire Group, they've seen an increase of 41% in their private GP appointments in 1 year alone. So that was between 23 and 24. And as a result of all the surveys that they did in order to sort of glean the rationale behind that, it probably goes, well, it's not a surprise, and it goes without saying that one of the driving factors, their main driving factors, was access, easy access. And there was also a reference there in terms of the demographic analysis that they did, that clearly the younger demographic within society are more willing to use electronic means in order to book and obviously to see their clinician when it comes to GP appointments. So that's what's happened, and that's just a sort of a high-level summary of some of the big things that we've seen over the last 10 years. We now have the 10-year plan, which aims to fix all of the above, he says. So, over to Andrew.
Thank you, Rob. It's amazing how much change there has been in a 10-year period, and just thinking about, 2019, when we saw PCNs come into being, it's just happened so quickly. So the pace of change within NHS continues, and no doubt it will be continuing at that pace moving forward. So what is the 10-year plan? I'm sure on the 3rd of July of this year, you all diligently sat down and read all 168 pages of that 10-year plan and probably thought the same as me. This is very aspirational, but is it actually achievable? I'll leave you to form your own views on that, but just to quote what is taken from the website itself, it seizes the opportunities provided by new technologies, medicines and innovations to deliver better care for all patients, wherever they live and whatever they earn, and better value for taxpayers. And there are 3 big shifts which they are proposing. First one is from hospital to community, second one from analog to digital, and thirdly, from sickness to prevention. And to achieve this, there are 5 enablers, which we will focus on some of them as we go through this evening. But you will see one of them is operating model, and that is particularly referenced to a devolved and diverse NHS. Innovation is surrounding technology. The workforce is talking about the harnessing of technology, the development of skills, improving training and development, and also flexible working options. Whether that fits with 6 days of working 12 hours a day, I am not entirely convinced, but we shall see. Quality of care talks about better data to support patients make choices, investment in technology again, and clearer accountability. And then finally, productivity and the financial model. It talks about year of care payments, better use of estate and leverage the private sector investment. I think that's a particularly key point. Eradicating deficits, eradicating waste, and fairer geographic distribution. So, having gone through the highlights, and bearing in mind we are here this evening to really focus on primary care, I have a question for you, and that is, how many times in the plan is general practice referenced in those 168 pages? Do we have any volunteers for a number? 6? 7? Any advances on 7? 18. Wow, Hannah, that's bold. 0.
Oh, always the pessimist, Ian, always the pessimist.
The correct answer is 3, which I think I was just shocked at how few reference there is with regards to primary care, considering that primary care is the gateway to all things NHS. The 3 references are page 29, GP access has become so poor that A&E has become some people's de facto primary care, particularly in the more disadvantaged areas where there are far fewer GPs per head. Page 32, I won't go through all of it, but the bit in bold is the important bit, where the traditional GP partnership model is working well, it should continue,
but we'll also create an alternative for GPs. And then finally, on page 136, we're getting towards the end of it, we will also review how health need is reflected in nationally 136 determined contracts, such as the Cahill formula for general practice. That's it. So moving on to, what do we know so far? What do we know so far? So there are some commitments, and this evening we are going to look at those in red. So reforming the NHS operating model, introducing new public-private partnership models, moving to outcomes-based and capitated payment mechanisms, and reviewing the Cahill formula for general practice. There's mention of dental contracts and authority collaboration, but let's have a look at what the commitments in red, what we know so far. So the first one is reforming the operating model. So you'll see the reference to devolution and empowering local leaders and communities. We will see how that manifests. Provider leaders will be able to become a new version of more empowered foundation trusts. Rob and I were having a chat about foundation trusts before this meeting kicked off. Rob, you had a view on foundation trusts, if I may invite you to comment.
Yeah, so a number of that we act for various different foundation trusts, and Andrew was asking me whether I think foundation trusts are starting to sort of get their act together and enter into more formally the sort of arenas that you guys are working. And the answer to that is not at the moment. And the reason for that is they're busy with their own problems. You know, many of them are running at significant deficits. And despite the change as of last week around wholly owned subsidiaries, for instance, they're busy thinking about amalgamation, shared leadership, wholly owned subsidiaries and the like. So they're busy with their own problems, but you know, who knows? It's likely that they will at some point in the future consider venturing into the sort of models that are being created, but no immediate plans that we're seeing.
And possibly the main reason for that is the bit in bold at the bottom. At the moment, there is no indication of more money being invested in the NHS. So Rob talked previously about how much money has gone to secondary care rather than to primary care. There does need to be a shift. But as far as I can see, all of these aspirations will need funding. Where that funding comes from, it remains to be seen. So the next slide looks at public and private partnership models. So the fact that private is mentioned shows that there will be a shift in how primary care is operating in the future and how the NHS as a whole is operating in the future. It talks about commercial partners working with universities, councils and mayors, and also the 5 big technological bets, which Rob will come onto in due course. Devolution is coming. I think there can be no doubt about that. And it's going to be that you as a collective will be working with more private providers to deliver the NHS that is fit for purpose for the next 10 years and beyond. There's a plan to move to outcomes-based and capitated payment mechanisms. Again, you'll see some text in bold. We talk about the Darcy review, which Rob has already mentioned, and again, highlighting the fact, no new money. There's talk of regional health innovation zones, which Rob will come on to. The penultimate paragraph is the one which I find really interesting, and it talks about the ICBs, providers, mayors and industry. But the bit where it says they will have the means to experiment with new commissioning models, including commissioning industry to deliver service on a payment for outcomes basis. I think you're probably all seeing a trend that's coming within this. Anything to add at that point, Rob?
No, not on that one, no.
I think so. Okay. So the last one we're going to focus on at this point is the Cahill formula. So Cahill, there's a number of youngsters in the room who don't remember when this first came in, but sadly I do. So new GMS came in on the 1st of April 2004, and the Cahill model was introduced. It wasn't really fit for purpose when it came in, and it's certainly outdated and not fit for purpose now. But what the Cahill formula looks at is patient age and gender, the additional needs of your patient list, the number of newly registered patients, the rurality of your practice, the cost of living, and patient age and gender for nursing and residential consultations. So the plan, as far as we know, is to redesign the formula to improve the allocation of primary care funding to address health inequalities, and that will be topped up by funds reallocated from system deficit support. And it talks about the inverse care rule, where the formula for seeing GP surgery serving deprived parts of England receive on average 9.8% less funding per needs adjusted patient than practices in more affluent areas. And certainly we see that across our client base. So Rob, over to you in respect of the Neighbourhood Health Service.
Yeah, so the Neighbourhood Health Service, this is the knight in shining armour that's going to deliver on this shift into the community, if you like. So what is the Neighbourhood Health Service? As the name suggests, the idea is to bring care back into the community, take it away and shift it away from hospitals. The mantra, as is written in the 10-year plan, and I think every summary that I've ever seen since the 10-year plan, is care should happen as locally as it can, digitally by default, in patient's home if possible, in neighbourhood health centres when needed, in a hospital if necessary. So already you start to see by that rhetoric, the ambition is to move things away from hospitals, bring it within the neighbourhood setting. But already there's some pretty big aspirations there. Digitally by default, we're far from that now. Neighbourhood health centres, what are these? We don't have these at the moment. And is it possible to deliver the things that we need to deliver to patients in their home? So how are they going to do it? The main ways in which they have articulated this shift is they're going to shift the pattern of spending. The aim is, and again, going back to Andrew's point, this is not new money. What they're talking about is repurposing money which is already there and moving it away from different parts of the NHS. But shifting that pattern of spending, so moving that dial away from that 58% or whatever it's crept up to, so more of it comes into the community. Creating 2 new contracts, which we'll come on to. Establishing neighbourhood health centres in each community. Overhauling the NHS app. So that will cover advice, bookings, you name it. The plan is that the NHS app will cover it. And increasing the role of community pharmacy. So when it comes to that NHS app, I've sat through various different talks since the announcement of the 10-year plan with a lot of people that work in the technology industry, in the sector there. And the common theme that comes out from that discussion is dealing with the NHS and the NHS app team is an absolute nightmare. Trying to get anything to work or embed itself within the platform is nigh on impossible. Unless you address that, this doesn't happen. But anyway, let's assume it is possible. They will address that. What will we see? So imagine, and Ben, we were on an away day as a team a couple of weeks ago, and I can't say that we did the research. It was done through ChatGPT, wasn't it? And we asked ChatGPT what getting a consultation will look like in 10 years' time if it all goes to plan. And it was amazing. Honestly, it was rays of sunshine were beaming through. It was incredible. But what will your phone and this NHS app do? They will have everything with a My Children, where you can manage your child's healthcare. My Medicines, that will manage the medications that you might be on if you need repeat prescriptions. My Consult, so you can all go in one central hub and deliver remote consultations. My Choices, I can choose who I go and see through my phone. My NHS GP, and where you'll get instant access to non-urgent advice. All very aspirational. Great if it happens, but as I said, there's some real fundamental problems if you speak within the tech sector to actually achieve that. So I think what they're going to need to do, and we should have said, what have we got so far, is we were expecting to sit in front of you today and talk around the implementation plan of the 10-year plan. That was supposed to come out the first week of September, and we're coming into October, and that's still not been released. So, I think they're starting to realise they're going to have to start biting off some of these big aspirations and deal with it in a more manageable way. But the theory's good behind it. We have to have a plan to sort of aspire and work towards. So the 2 new contracts. So this is something which I think everybody is going to need to be aware of and live to. So the 2 new contracts are expected to roll out in 2026. And yes, there is the possibility that it could be, in terms of the provider that holds them, alternatives to the traditional GP model or the current provider stock that we have at the moment. But leaving that aside, because we don't know the details of who can and can't hold them, but I would bet my house on the fact that it could be held by any provider. There won't be any restrictions on that. That we'll have single neighbourhood provider contracts. So the ambition there under the 10-year plan is that work within the geographical locations of primary care networks. So I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to say, actually, this new contract will be something which primary care networks, particularly those that have incorporated, will look to take up and will be best suited to take them up, because they'll be able to work down with practices and then have the scale to work up with the new providers, which are multi-neighbourhood providers. And they will cover, if you remember, I showed you that slide from the King's Fund earlier, where we had the system-wide, place-wide, and then neighbourhood level. Well, this is covering that place level. So in essence, what we've got is we've got a specific provider. We've already got a provider at that neighbourhood level in PCNs now. We have nothing in this gap with the place level. That's all collaborations at the moment between different providers. So it's likely that suddenly this is going to fill that gap. We're going to have a multi-neighbourhood provider that sits within that gap there, covering populations of around 250,000. Andrew, you had a point to make around the funding on this. It was pessimistic about it, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was looking at the risk of the current contract funding being redirected to the 2 new contracts. So it is looking at potentially the local budgets for your locally commissioned services and also PCNs to be raided. We hope not, but you could see that is one possibility. However, as a ray of light, the government does seem committed to negotiate a new core contract. So I do think there is hope that it's not going to be completely raided and diverted to the new neighbourhood contracts.
I mean, in terms of the actual contracts itself and the ideas behind it, if we're looking at that integrated care system as a principle, it makes sense, because the announcement of the integrated care system just doesn't work because the providers are not there at scale operating at the levels they wanted to. Those contracts will address this. And actually that single neighbourhood provider contract might shift what is currently a DES for PCNs into a standalone contract as opposed to it being a bolt-on. So moving on, neighbourhood health centres. As I mentioned earlier, there is an aspiration that there is one in every community. You define community. We don't know whether we're talking at that 250,000 patient level, whether we're talking lower than that or above that. The aim is that they will start with places where life expectancy is lowest. And the idea behind it all is this is going to be an amazing one-stop shop for patient care. There's going to be multidisciplinary teams working together. There'll be voluntary sectors working alongside NHS, working alongside local authorities, all in one building. As Andrew was mentioning around the workforce there, the idea being that they will be open for at least 12 hours a day for 6 days a week. Now, interestingly, this is where we get to the point of money. Well, where's this money come from to build these amazing new health centres? No, wait, we're going to repurpose poorly used or existing NHS and public sector estates. So that's one way we can get around potentially forking out a fortune for these purpose-built buildings. However, there is going to need to still be some significant capital investment here. And oh no, are we hearing the word PPP again? So we are talking about private financing within the NHS again. Now, within the 10-year plan, they reference it, but they don't commit to it. There's a reference there that it will be considered and announced as part of the budget. So it won't be too long before we hear whether this will become a realisation. But let's be honest, and again, I've sat through a number of talks on this since then. Well, where else is the money going to come from? It's not coming from anywhere else. So the reality is I think it's a very high probability that in the budget they will announce that this will become a reality again. However, we're talking about neighbourhood health centres. Yeah, these new, shiny, great new buildings. But what about the rest of the NHS estate? Now, in the 10-year plan, they've got some pretty stark statistics there. And one of those was that 22% of primary care buildings predate the NHS itself. Now, that's pretty damning. So it's fine to talk about these new neighbourhood health centres, but with anything, and we've talked about this on many occasions, and the NHS works on a solid foundation. The infrastructure has to be right, and that solid foundation has to be working properly. The infrastructure needs to be there. So what have we seen? What have we got? Well, they're championing this boosting capital budget by just over $3 billion. We've now got the latest premises cost directions, which Ian and I both know took a ridiculously long amount of time to come into realisation because of various different reasons. So there is now the mechanism in which that funding can be flowed through for improvements and for new developments. But there is still some nervousness with that, and rightly so. So I'm joined by my colleague, Jen Lewis, who's in our real estate team, and she handles a lot of this when it comes to capital grants and the grant agreements that they're being asked to sign up to. And there is that nervousness there. And the reason for that is there's certain conditions which are automatically applied to these grants. And the two main ones there is that there is a minimum use period depending on the level of grant you have. So you have to continue to use the premises for a minimum period of time for general practice. And if you don't, then there's an obligation to repay a proportion of that grant funding. So rightly so, there's some nervousness around it. Right, so how can it work? And this is all just me thinking and me surmising what it's going to be. We haven't had the implementation plan. So I think we're going to have a sort of a pyramid structure. Inevitably, we will have. So we'll have this multi-neighbourhood provider at the top. And whilst we don't know what they'll provide under their contracts, the references in there, I mean, basically anything you think a provider could do to address all the problems within the NHS, they've just lumped in to say, okay, well, the multi-neighbourhood provider will deal with this. So data analytics, outpatient services, they want to end hospitals dealing with outpatient services. That will all be dealt with in the community. An interesting one, performance coaching for struggling practices within their locality. So if there's problems there, they will go in and help to bring you up to a required standard. Clinical trials, digital transformation, they will lead on the strategy and the delivery. So they will be doing a lot. Now, who's going to deliver that? This is going to be the battleground. Well, I say the battleground as to who's going to be delivering on this. It can be, and Andrew's going to come on to this in terms of plurality of providers, but in essence, it could be anyone. So we could have NHS trusts, we could have GP federations, we could have large-scale providers, that could be solely NHS, they could be private. They could all come in from what's been written so far within the 10-year plan to deliver on this contract. We then have the single neighbourhood providers. Now, interestingly, there's this throwaway comment in there, very, very small comment around the fact that they consider it to be an enhanced service, which got me thinking, okay, well, they're already thinking on this, and this is going to be a bolt-on to a GP contract in some way, shape or form. Personally, I think this will be delivered by primary care networks at primary care network level. It seems the obvious thing. Why tear up 5 years of pain that you've all gone through to get to a point where they're actually set up and they're probably working well or okay. Well, if you can move to the well, great. And then we'll have still at practice level will have the GMS, PMS, APMS contracts delivering essential services delivered by GP contractors. So with that in mind, what organisational changes, when I say we, I'm not going to attribute to this just in case it's not right, that I expect when I was thinking about this. Now, at practice level, going back to the slide right at the outset around the changes we've seen in the last 10 years and what we're seeing in terms of the work that comes through to us to support with, we're going to see further mergers and amalgamations of GP practices. Inevitably, we will. Now, they may well be for positive reasons, but at the moment, the primary reasons we're still seeing for mergers is problems with succession with one provider, and that's being the trigger point for that merger to take place. We are going to see more practice incorporations. The size of your business, again, humour me if it goes the way I'm thinking, the size of your business is going to continue to grow. So patient list size, who you have to deal with, the number of services you're delivering. Therefore, there'll be a bigger drive towards protecting business owners, partners from personal liability that comes with that. We talked around premises, leases, etc. How do you do that? You incorporate. You have an incorporated vehicle and you protect yourself that way. So I expect we'll see practice incorporations. We may even see incorporations to limited liability partnerships. So there has been a commitment as part of the new contract to discuss the possibility of the rules around GMS contracts being relaxed. At the moment, they're quite restrictive around who can and can't hold GMS contracts to allow LLPs to do so. Now, if that were to happen, usually the things that we find with inquiries come from incorporations, and I'm sure Andrew as well, all the sort of negatives around it will go away. I suspect most, if not all, will jump on that and incorporate to become an LLP. Are you an LLP? Oh, we're an LLP. There's a reason why we all create LLPs. They're tax equivalent to partnerships, but you've got that protection of that limited liability wrapper. However, and let's not forget, this 10-year plan is very aspirational and all these great things, but remember I talked about that flip side of the coin. It's like a mirror image. For the practices, for the business owners that are thinking, actually, I want to diversify here, I foresee there's going to be a move towards creating more group structures within providers. And what I mean by that is effectively we will separate NHS to private provision. And what we will have there, and there's multiple reasons to do that. So there's various different restrictions within your core contracts around advertising, around goodwill. And so by creating those group structures, we can start navigating around that. So I foresee that as being a strong possibility. And we'll see multi-site practices, but operating in far more purpose-built facilities. I think we'll start to shift away from the much smaller practices in your semi-detached houses into more purpose-built facilities. So that's at practice level. At PCN level, to the extent it hasn't already happened, I foresee PCN incorporations will become the norm. If it's going to sit in there and deliver on that neighbourhood provider contract, then it would make sense for that primary care network to incorporate. Now, when it comes to estate, I don't see PCNs having their own distinct estate. I think they'll still work closely with practices and they will look to operate within practice level premises. Now, Jen mentioned there are references, and you may remember when we were negotiating this at the time, there are references to the ability and actually the obligation to look around utilising space for other purposes as well. So there are mechanisms built in the cost directions already to do that. And above, what are we going to see? Well, from your perspective, we may well see either the formation or the repurposing of GP federations. So I had a telephone call with a new potential client yesterday that's looking at this very thing. So creating a new entity covering their whole area with the sole purpose of considering what's coming down the track in terms of that a place level contract. inevitably, given what they're going to be required, or what we believe they're going to be required, we're going to see a lot of collaborations, joint ventures, and subcontracting. So there's all this talk around voluntary sectors, around local authorities and other providers working together in these neighbourhood health centres. That doesn't get done on a handshake. That's going to have some pretty robust collaborative arrangements in place. I'd expect they would be the ones that hold the primary interest in these neighbourhood health centres. So in essence, they would be the ones that take the lease of these premises, to the extent that it's not taken by ICBs. Have you ever come across an ICB taking a lease, Jen? No. Despite having the ability to do so, they still don't. So that's me. Andrew, do you want to add into that? I know you're going to talk about the program sites.
Yeah, so let's move on to the health information program sites that Rob has just alluded to. So initially there were going to be 42 sites. Somehow we've ended up with 43. And they are a test bed for new primary care contracts. Now, it's not on the slide, but the initial focus is on supporting long-term conditions. And the ones they quote are things such as diabetes, arthritis, angina, high blood pressure, multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy. And they are targeting areas with the lowest life expectancy and the longest waits for care. Now, closer to home, we have North East Essex, Ipswich and East Suffolk, West Essex and West Suffolk. Again, no additional funding being provided to these pilots, but they will each be allocated a national coach. Okay, so I do believe it's the both of us now, Rob, in terms of the 5 key technological bets. So I think you were going to start with the first slide.
Yeah. So what are the bets? So we mentioned at the start the enablers here. So with technology, what they're saying is they are betting behind 5 key technologies that they think will deliver the most amount of change within the NHS. So their 5 big technological bets are data, AI, genomics and predictive analysis, wearables, and robotics. So what does that mean? So these are the aspirations behind it. And again, I'll go back to this thing we did on our away day, which was quite scary in terms of what it could potentially do, and your clinician phoning you and said, oh, you've had a bad night. Are you okay? Because of your wearables telling your sleep pattern. So anyway, so the idea being by 2035, there will be a single patient record, and everybody that works within the NHS will be able to access that, and you will, most importantly, be able to access that. And I say that after having problems trying to get x-rays from one hospital to another, which was a nigh on impossibility. Next thing is around AI. So what's the purpose and what are they aiming for with AI? So really it's there to not only support when it comes to administrative functions, so in essence note-taking whilst you're going through consultations, but also support, and there's reference to them being your AI buddy when it comes to making diagnostics. Most importantly, it would plug in and be dealt with in terms of real-time data. So next one is around genome sequencing. So this really goes back to this point around prevention. So what they want to do is they want to genetically scan people at birth or shortly after, and effectively understand what the potential risks are going to be when it comes to their health as they grow. The idea is a good one. Effectively, it's preventative medicine there. So stopping the reactive healthcare system that we largely see. Now, in terms of that real-time monitoring, we have these wearables. So I am thinking, who's going to pay for the wearables for everybody? And, God forbid, I can just imagine an NHS wearable, what the size of it and what it can look like. It's probably a backpack rather than a wearable. But The idea being it's going to be real-time monitoring. It's going to encourage healthier behaviours. And, those that have a Garmin or an Apple Watch or whatever, you'll probably have steps and all things. So the idea being it will encourage healthier behaviour and be proactive, enable proactive healthcare. So the idea being is that will feed right through to your doctors, to your healthcare teams, and they'll be able to monitor what's going on with your health and be able to react to that by reference to red flags that are potentially raised. And then we've got robotics. And robotics, the idea behind it is they will effectively not only automate certain things within things like hospitals around cleaning, but also they will assist with precision surgery. And there's, whether you've been party to it, there's quite a good debate around whether people would trust a robot to do their surgery when compared to a human, despite the stats that are behind it saying how accurate robotics are when it comes to those sorts of things. But still, people, are still siding on human surgical intervention. So they are the 5 bets, and that's what it means. Now, if you Google or as I said, put it through ChatGPT as what that could mean, it's quite scary. So I would suggest doing it just to see what it could look like. But over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Rob. So the next section looks at plurality. I can't say that at all. Plurality of provision. And Rob has already alluded to this, so just have a quick look at the detail behind it. It's talking about neighbourhood health service moving care into the community with the creation of the neighbourhood health centres, being that one-stop shop and also open for at least 12 hours a day and 6 days a week, with GP access being a key part of those. My question, which none of you will be able to answer at this stage, is where are all the GPs coming from? And how will these centres be funded? I'm struggling, I have to say, but this is the 10-year plan. This is what they want to. This is where they want to get to. So if anybody's got any inspiration or ideas of how this may work, please do share them. But as I said, I am lost as to how this will happen. Very aspirational, but is it achievable? Time will tell. And then what does this all mean for general practice and your PCNs? So looking at your integrated care boards, they will be the strategic commissioners of local health services, and they will be responsible for all but the most specialised commissioning using multi-year budgets. The key takeaway, I'll leave you to read those other 2 paragraphs, but the key takeaway is that those ICBs, they will be responsible for delivering a new commissioning framework. The 2 new contracts which Rob mentioned, they will not just be for general practice, and the ICB can commission services from other providers, including non-NHS entities. So there is a raft of change coming. The key is to make sure that you are prepared as well as you can be for what comes next. There is also reference to earned autonomy for providers. And I'd like to focus on that second paragraph where it talks about addressing underperformance in the areas with the worst health outcomes, such as rural and coastal communities. If we go back a few slides and look at the 43 pilot sites, I don't see much in the way of rural and coastal community in that list close to home. Maybe it's my age, but I can't help feel a bit cynical about how those 43 sites were arrived at when there are 141 applications that were submitted. Do you have a view, Rob, or would you rather keep that one to yourself?
I've got a inkling, but it's very pessimistic. It's probably chosen in part by reference to the success they'll find from it. But hey.
So in other words, the sites that they have chosen, you think that they are likely to be the ones that can demonstrate changing quickly?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And then the final paragraph, practices can remain contractors, but the likelihood is you'll no longer be independent. You will be evolving into bigger entities, as Rob suggests, with integration with non-NHS providers as well. So this is a path of travel that does seem to be inevitable in the 10-year plan and beyond. So we then move on to GPC guidance. So what comes next? Practices that are here this evening, PCNs, you should start to be thinking about how you operate in your neighbourhoods and looking at how you collaborate with others, really to protect your own interests as members, member practices, and care of your patients. The LMC will be vital to all of this, so make sure that you attend all events that the LMC puts on and engage with them. One thing that's not on there, and it is probably to say don't panic. This is all going to take time. Don't feel as if you've got to rush into something with immediate effect, but think about what comes next and how you are best placed. At the moment, you are independent, the networks work closely with each other. You have an opportunity to work together and move quickly as and when it's necessary. But at the moment, there is no urgency to do anything different, but just be aware. I think this evening, if there's one takeaway, it's having an awareness of what comes next. The resources will shift. We talked about funding a lot this evening. There is no new money at the moment. It will shift, so it's making sure that you are in a position where you get access to as much of that as possible. And then possible organisation models. We haven't mentioned community interest companies as yet, but that is one option. Mutuals and cooperatives are another, but I do think that limited companies as well as LLPs will be a direction of travel which absolutely we can help you with and something you should be thinking about. And Rob can help you with the actual structures, shareholders agreements, and everything that goes alongside that. So next point is how can we as professionals help you? So the 3 steps that I've outlined are continue to build collaborative services and integrate with your neighbouring practices. Take a proactive lead in identifying and defining the needs of your neighbourhood. Create relationships and contacts with other providers, including other primary care services, community services, social services, and third parties. So in terms of what you should be looking at currently, it's looking at your own partnerships to start with. Are they sustainable with the planned changes incoming? Are your partnerships working well? Rob mentioned mergers. Is it something that you should start to consider with a neighbourhood practice, or is that further down the line? I think having those relationships with your neighbouring practices, particularly the engagement you have with your PCN, it's not saying you must do it, but at least be prepared for what comes next. The operating structures, absolutely we can help you on. That will evolve over a period of time as we learn more as to how the direction of travel goes. The bit that I'd like to focus on is things such as working capital, tax positions, asset ownership, etc. So primary care networks, when they came in 2019, I think it's fair to say that NHS England did not really discuss things with HM Revenue and Customs, and there's been huge issues in terms of exposure to VAT, employment status, just how things interact from a tax and superannuation perspective. Superannuation, as an example, for clinical directors has been an absolute nightmare as well. So just making sure that you have the appropriate professional advice to avoid any potential pitfalls is vital. Working capital, you'll be aware of working capital within your own practices, and your working capital funds the day-to-day requirements of those practices. At network level, the networks came in 2019. No one introduced money at that stage to provide working capital. If you think about how those networks have expanded since 2019 to where we are now, the average network is probably turning over in the region of £3 million. And the working capital is literally funded out of core funding and surpluses which are left in by member practices. The bigger the entity, the more working capital is likely to be required. So how will that be funded? It depends on the structure that you operate in. So again, working with us to look at those is going to be really important to you. Rob did mention LLPs. We'll wait to see where we get to with those. I think it is, if it is an opportunity for GMS contracts to go into LLPs, it's definitely the way to go. You will be taxed and superannuated in the same way, but that limitation of liability will make you more attractive to the next generation coming through as well, and help some of you sleep better at night.
It's probably worth saying, and it's a bit with practice and corporations now to form limited companies. Some of the big reasons for that are around premises, contracts that you hold. And the critical thing to take away in connection with any incorporation, whether that's ultimately an LLP or a limited company, you can't automatically transfer contracts unless it allows you to do so. So if you've got a lease, a whacking great lease over a big health centre building, and you're thinking, actually, I can use this as a means to avoid liability, that might well be the case, but you need the rights to be able to do that under that lease. So, if you're considering it, early consideration around the key reasons and rationale why you're looking to do it from a liability perspective and whether you're able to do it or not would be critical. But linked to that point is if you're entering into contracts, consider it as a possibility. It might never come up, but certainly any leases that we would put in place now, we would expect provisions in there which enable you to be able to assign the lease over to any entity that holds a core contract. So just have a bit of sort of planning ahead just in case that becomes a reality, i.e. you have those contracts in place to be able to, we used to do it.
Thank you, Rob. As far as your networks are concerned, the most important thing at this point is having transparency of those numbers and understanding those numbers as well. So if any of you are in a network where you don't see annual accounts, they're not discussed, you don't understand how the funding flows, you don't understand how money moves from the network to your own practices, then please, please, please do take the appropriate advice and have those accounts looked at for you, because it's so, so important. And again, it is a complete minefield, and you want to make sure that everything is in the right place to be able to move forward with what comes next. Rob has mentioned bidding for new contracts. Limited company structures are probably the way to go when it comes to new contracts. Rob, would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the contract that's been bid for, but certainly if it's, I think the key thing always to take away with this is you want to protect your core business if you're going into a venture and bidding for new contracts. So, if you're doing it as a not a side project, but away from your core business, and you want to protect that, then certainly some form of separate entity would be wise.
The comfort that I take is that GPs will always be wanted in this country, and at the moment we don't have enough. So for them to implement these plans, there needs to be more of you. And can I take the opportunity to say thank you very much for all that you do for the communities that you work in. I think primary care is deeply undervalued, and it has been for a long, long time, but the NHS would not be the NHS without primary care. So sincerely, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for Larking Gowen Insights, Accountancy and Business Advice for All. Don't forget, you can find more information about today's topic and more about how our team of experts can help you in your business by visiting our website, larking-gowen.co.uk. Join us again next time for another fascinating insight into the world of accounting and finance.